What day is it? Where even am I? Constantly all I do is watch Supernatural. It's consumed me. But now, it's one final run. One last ride.
Did you know that I've talked about around 168 hours of Supernatural? Believe it or not, that's only 60 hours longer than the current slate of MCU movies, and Supernatural's over. So imagine the hell that my MCU retrospective is going to be. Moving into the final chapter in this over year-long retrospective, I really struggled to figure out how I wanted to close things out. Do I spend an awfully long time talking about how much this show means to me? Do I just dive right into it? Do I attempt to evade copyrights more and more? The answer still hasn't fully come to me, but I figured I could just start by talking about the final showrunner of the final 4 seasons of Supernatural, Andrew Dabb. Andrew Dabb's contributions to the show, much like Jeremy Carver's, were pretty great. Taking a look back at his episodes, I really struggle to find ones that I dislike, at least before season 9, when he starts to handle more plot-focused episodes that naturally become duller. Season 4's Yellow Fever is an absolute classic, and I mentioned After School Special in the first part of this series as one of the best episodes of season 4. Season 5 features perhaps the best episode written by him, Dark Side of the Moon. It's one of the best shows ever, and a lot of concepts that Andrew Dabb would tackle in his seasons are actually present there. The episode is all about false ideas of family, especially to Dean, whether it's learning that every happy memory Sam has is without him and their dad, or seeing his parents fight from an outside perspective. The episode focuses heavily on all of these aspects. The scenes with Mary directly feel like a prequel to Mary's entire arc in the first season we'll talk about today, season 12, albeit, 7 seasons later. Dean's comment to Sam about how his parents' marriage was never perfect until she died directly ties into the themes of season 12. It's pretty interesting to see how Andrew Dabb was able to revisit ideas in a single episode from season 5 and expand them into such a fascinating arc. It's something that I think he does a lot in his run, and I'll talk about it later, but I think I could dive into Dark Side of the Moon on its own sometime. Of course, I really can't discredit Dabb's writing partner, Daniel Laughlin. It's actually not until Laughlin stops writing on the show that the Dabb episodes begin to lose a bit of their iconic status, so maybe he was the one behind some of the greatness. It's hard to say though, because season 11's Form and Void and The Devil in the Details are some of the best of that entire season, so I really have no idea. Andrew Dabb's run of the show encompasses the final 4 seasons, seasons 12 through 15, and tackles concepts such as the multiverse, free will, again, beings older than time itself, and thematic concepts such as false ideas of role models, as well as nature versus nurture and parenting itself. An interview with Dabb stated that season 12 is very much about children coming to terms with their parents, while season 13 is about Sam and Dean using what they've learned to be parents. It's a pretty interesting concept, and it allows for the next 4 seasons that we're going to talk about to link together in a thematically cohesive way. I've talked a lot about plans and cohesive storytelling, mostly about the ways the show has failed to properly follow up seasons 1 through 5 in that regard. Thankfully, in my opinion, seasons 12 through 15 feel like the most realized era of this show after seasons 1 through 5. Now go ahead and type out your comments about how you hate this era, how much Andrew Dabb sank the show into the ground, because that's not what I'm going to be talking about here. If you haven't seen from the title, I like this era. One thing people don't realize about the Kripke era is that Kripke didn't really have a 5-year plan or have everything planned out. The original ending of the show was going to be Dean having to track down Sam after Sam goes evil. That's not what we got. Angels weren't even going to be introduced until Kripke read Preacher during the 2007-2008 writer's strike. Eric Kripke was just a genius when it came to weaving in disconnected narrative bits together to create a story that felt so planned out. A great example is the Croatoan virus from season 2 being fit into part of Lucifer's plan in the apocalypse. There's not a chance in the empty that that was planned as far back as season 2, but in the end it works out, so who really cares? He was just able to take disconnected bits and flesh them out, tie them together like a nice little bow. So why then am I bringing all of this up? Because I want to illustrate that a lot of Kripke's storytelling involved making up shit as he went along, and then going back and tying things together. Andrew Dabb takes a different approach to weaving the story over multiple seasons, but it's one that I think definitely works. The entirety of season 12 is all building up to Jack, Lucifer's son, being born, which is this huge nexus point of the entire run. Following this, season 13 really begins to lay the groundwork for a lot of future events, including Death's Library, the concept of death books, Reapers having a greater role in the universe, and several other concepts that I'll most likely get to later. A really interesting element of Dabb's run is in season 13 when Billy tells Dean that he has a lot of work to do. It's such an open-ended statement. Of course they do. They're Sam and Dean. And then in season 15, we find out that work that they have to do, yeah, it's because they're the harbingers of God's destruction. And things become a lot cooler. And is that really any different than Eric Kripke tying the Croatoan virus back into everything? I don't think so. But I've talked too much about the broad strokes of this run. Let me go ahead and dive into the most controversial run of the show, and with it, my controversial opinion that it is the supernatural renaissance. Season 12 aired from October 13th, 2016 to May 18th, 2017. It has 23 episodes, and the main storyline is the British Men of Letters and Lucifer's Child. Okay, so technically the supernatural renaissance began with season 11, but by the time that I had these titles fully ironed out, I'd already made the Gamble Era video, so going by showrunners was the route that I was kind of stuck in. If I could go about it differently, I think the series would be more like 3 episodes with 5 seasons each, but I'm just gonna shut up and start talking about season 12. This season is a clear and solidified step down from season 11. No one's going to argue that it's not. But I also feel like the only real competition that it has after season 5 is probably season 8. I know the season gets a lot of hate from people, but like a lot of this video will show, I find it hard to truly pin down the general consensus of this season. I see some people online really like it, some have it at the very bottom of their ranking, and others have it in the middle. I'm definitely in that last camp, but I do like this season. I think it has a lot of fun things to offer. Season 12's strength just come from a lot of the new and creative ideas that the show has gotten. It breathes new life into concepts, character arcs, and storylines. While initially it might have felt like Mary's return was something that showed the show was completely out of ideas, I feel like she's actually utilized really well here. It definitely takes a while before she clicks for me, I'll admit that, and I think that Mary more as an idea is more interesting than a character, but I really did enjoy seeing Sam and Dean confront their mother as well. I used to dislike Mary a lot, but when you look at it from a third-person perspective, I think it makes a ton of sense why she's acting this way. She literally doesn't know these two people. They're grown men with the same names of her children, and truthfully, Sam and Dean don't know her either. I really like a lot of the drama that arises in this season between the boys and their mother. Speaking of drama, one of the things that I really hated about the show in the past few seasons was the forced and meaningless drama between Sam and Dean. It was agonizing, especially in season 9, to the point where on a rewatch of the season, before I started this retrospective, I'd fast forward any scene that just had the two of them in it. Do you know how bad you've messed up when you have me skipping scenes with Sam and Dean talking? Those were like the best parts of the show in the early season. The drama in the season and the stretch of the show in general is entirely different, mainly because it doesn't really exist. Now Sam and Dean aren't always on the same page, that'd be unrealistic and boring, but there's never really moments where one of them completely shuts the other out and they go hunting separately like there's some preteen. The moment I realized this was when Sam admitted that he'd been working with the British Men of Letters for the last few episodes. You brace yourself for impact, expecting Dean to emotionally abuse Sam and blow up, and then nothing. Dean moves on. He says he'll even attempt to give the British Men of Letters a chance, just to see Sam's side of it. I gasped. Was this really the same show as the past 5 seasons? No way it could have been. I think it actually speaks to a wider change in the show to talk about the tonal differences between this season and what came before. Season 7 through 10 often felt like stuck in some sort of hamster wheel that Supernatural thought it should be. I mean, seasons 8, 9, and 10 never really felt like anything was scaling up. The storylines were repetitive, the tone was a sort of drab and uninteresting vibe. Supernatural has always been funny and wacky, episodes are in its DNA, but I never felt like, aside from a few exceptions, that the past few seasons had those. Season 12 completely changes things. Gone are the dark, drab, melodrama-filled plot lines, and in their place is pure, unfiltered insanity. Supernatural is no longer a dark, gritty fantasy show, it's high fantasy now. It's borderline superhero. Sam and Dean are superheroes. This season ups the scale and stakes to things we've never seen before, and it manages to be one of the most fun seasons of the show because of it. In a single season alone, Dean kills Hitler, Satan possesses the president, the child of the devil is born, Sam and Dean break through the barriers into an alternate universe. A lot of this makes even more sense when you go back and look at Andrew Dabb's prior episodes. Episodes like Season 8's Hunteri Heroicy, which is literally just a Looney Tunes episode, or how about Yellow Fever, or Frontierland, and of course, Plucky Penny Whistle's Magic Menagerie definitely deserves a mention. I also mentioned during the intro that Andrew Dabb revisited elements of his episode Dark Side of the Moon when it came to Mary and Dean's dynamic, but another cool thing that he revisited was the idea of the Antichrist from another season 5 episode, this one being I Believe the Children Are Our Future. Some have argued that they actually should have just used Jesse, the kid from this episode, especially because he'd be around 18, which is essentially the same age that the fully grown Jack is when he's born, but I really don't think it'd have worked as well having a completely new character. I think it allows us to see him grow up and develop, and it allows a sort of cohesiveness between his run and the show's first run. And I've got to stop talking about the season in concept and start talking about its actual quality, and I think the reason that I've avoided that is that while I do like this season, it's also sort of nothing special. It's more interesting in the things that it sets up and showcases than the actual quality of the storylines. The season has 2 separate plots, and while they do not work at all together when it comes to scale, one of them is a very, very like high stakes cosmic threat and the other's a very, very personal one, and they just throw me out of the loop every time they jump between them. Neither of them hold a candle to season 11 or even season 8, and definitely not the first 5 seasons, but I think both of them end up working far stronger than season 6, 7, 9, and yeah, probably season 10. The worst of the 2 is easily the stuff with Kelly and Lucifer's kid. It does lead to some really cool things, mainly an absolutely bad shit finale, but I feel like it's mainly just season 13 setup, and it kind of takes away from the things that work in this season. It doesn't help that it occupies most of the middle of the season, which I find to just be the most boring chunk. Lucifer is taken care of in the first half, only for the writers to arbitrarily bring him back in a way that makes little to no sense. Don't get me wrong, I'm not one to nitpick how a plotline works, but the whole thing about Crowley enchanting Nick's body to be a prison for Lucifer just never really worked for me. It technically makes sense within the logic of the show, I guess, but it always felt more like a twist that didn't need to happen. The writers probably could have thought up a better way to fake defeat Lucifer in the mid-season finale, because this execution just cheapens a fairly solid way that they do that in that episode. I do think this plot culminates very well in the season finale. I used to hate this episode, and I can honestly kind of understand if someone said they still do, but I just think it's sort of awesome. I just love the absurdity of it. The birth of a Nephilim has ruptured the universe, and Sam and Dean meet an alternate Bobby and try and trap the devil there. It's so insane that I just cannot help but like to watch it and kind of just roll with the craziness. I think 12 seasons in, you sort of stop taking Supernatural so seriously, so when the show also stops taking itself seriously, you really can get into a groove. That's not even mentioning the fact that the alternate universe we get introduced to is the coolest shit. It's called Apocalypse World, and it looks really cool. It's a world where Sam and Dean were never born, so the apocalypse went in a completely different direction, and it's just so cool. And just because I know people have said this before, I don't think that this universe means that Sam and Dean were never going to exist. I just think it means that they were never born. So that's how Dean is still alternate Michael's vessel, and that's for season 13. There's also the fact that the good guys just barely win in this episode. They managed to keep Lucifer away from his son, but at the cost of Castiel, Crowley, Rowena, and their mother. It's just a bleak and sad ending, but I actually kind of like it. I mean, I get it. They just throw off a bunch of characters dying, and you know that half of them will be back in the next season. But I think at the end of the day, it really allows for such a bleak and, just downer ending that I don't think the show has had in a while, especially when you contrast it with the fact that they won. Lucifer is trapped in an alternate universe with no way back according to them. But yeah, I think this plot is just fine. It really just takes too long in the middle, and it never really feels like anything other than Sam and Dean chasing down Castiel and Kelly for like 6 episodes. The better plot, for me, is the British Men of Letters. And I know people hate them. I don't love them, but the storyline is compelling most of the time, and I mostly just enjoy it for the expansion upon the Men of Letters as a concept. It's one of my favorite additions that the Jeremy Carver era made, so having a faction of them be the villains of the season is pretty cool. I also really like the character of Mick Davies, and I think he goes through a solid arc, and while it's a little upsetting that he's killed off so early, I can't help but think that it did make sense in the end. I also really like seeing Sam and Dean have access to really cool hunter equipment. The ragtag on-the-road American hunters meeting the more high-tech British side of hunting was very fun to watch. Unfortunately, some new characters are not that great. I think Ketch kind of sucks for the bulk of the season, and Dr. Hess was never a very compelling antagonist. Lady Tony Bevel gets a solid first episode, but I never really cared for her either. Part of what saves the entire arc is how it's tied into Mary, and the episode Who We Are is an absolute highlight of the season, as it shows pretty much what Dabb was trying to hint at all the way back in Dark Side of the Moon. The acting from Jensen in this episode is terrific, and it's just a great cap off to the storyline. I do wish the show hadn't killed off basically all of its supporting characters over the years though, because seeing everyone dive into a fight against the British hunters really didn't hit as hard when they barely had any hunters that they could bring back. Still, I think this plot's pretty solid. All of the high-tech toys they introduced was fun. Getting the cult back was cool. Seeing the alpha vampire was awesome. It was just a fun concept, and I think they handled it pretty decently. And I think at the end of the day, even if the plots kind of fall short in broader strokes, the season gets by just on really cool concepts and filler episodes. Some of the best filler episodes of the show come from this season. Whether it's American Nightmare, which just felt right out of season 2, celebrating the life of Asa Fox, which is ironic for introducing new hunters and then killing them in the season that they were best in, but whatever. And Regarding Dean, which is an emotional gut punch of an episode. Lily Sunder has some regrets, manages to even tell a Castiel-centric story without it feeling boring. It's actually kind of crazy. Conceptually, the season had a lot going for it too right out the gate, but I really just have to praise how Lucifer was handled. I don't know if this is a hot take, but I actually really dig Lucifer this season, at least in the first half. He falls a bit in the middle chunk, but I really like him in the finale too. Ironically, Rockstar Lucifer was pretty fun to watch. He was a lot more subtle and menacing compared to Castiel's Lucifer, and I like that. On top of that, President Lucifer was a great addition and idea, and it led to a great episode with Sam and Dean being arrested for attempted assassination of the president, and I really can't believe that I just said that out loud. That's kind of crazy. Unfortunately, there are still a lot of middling episodes, and one of those episodes is the one that follows up the great mid-season finale where they attempt to kidnap the president. That's just something off-putting about an episode where Sam and Dean say that they've been in solitary confinement and it was worse than hell, especially when Sam was tortured by the devil himself. I know I praised this season earlier for being wacky and goofy, but something about Sam and Dean running around the woods with federal agents that could gun them down in an instant just felt dumb. Like there was a suspension of disbelief that I could not achieve. Not to mention the fact that they unironically had Dean say that the government was trapped in the forest with them and not the other way around. We also just get some bland episodes like The Memory Remains, an episode I've seen 3 times but can never recall other than they don't have the cult at the end of it, I think. Ladies Drink Free is an utterly forgettable outing, which sucks because I do like Claire, and Family Feud wraps up a dumb Crowley plotline, but it's still really boring. Speaking of Crowley, he kinda got the short end of the stick here, huh? He sort of just devolves into a character that exists purely to dick with Lucifer, and then he dies at the end. It's hard to be too upset about him dying when his character had been so stagnant the entire season, but it's still a shame that his final season was arguably him at his dullest. The standout episode of this season that I want to call attention to is episode 12, Stuck in the Middle with You, directed by Richard Speight Jr., who plays Gabriel in the show. It's not necessarily my favorite episode of the season, but it's one of the most unique of the show, and definitely the most interesting to talk about in the season. We get introduced to Ramiel, another Prince of Hell, the same type of demon as Azazel from seasons 1 and 2, and we also meet Dagon in this season. I really just like the expansion of lore when it comes to the demon. This episode's structure and pacing are also why I love it so much. Bouncing around to see all the different perspectives of this hunt gone terrible is such a fun way to do it, and the way that it all ties into the British plot is really fun, even if it ends up killing another hunter that could have been used to help fight the Brits in the finale. Woo! Definitely give this episode a watch just for the craftsmanship of it. Even if you haven't seen the show in a couple years, I think it's really worth it. It's just a really solid episode. At the end of the day, season 12 was a pretty big surprise to me on this rewatch. I never remembered hating it, but going into this rewatch, I didn't really expect to have as much fun with it as I did. There are loads of issues, but in the end, it's a very entertaining romp that acts as a springboard to set up the next few years of the show, which, as you'll come to find, I'm a pretty decent fan of those too. And honestly, 12 seasons in, fun is all I need the show to be. For my rating, I'm going to go ahead and give it a 7 out of 10. The best episodes are episode 22, Who We Are, episode 12, Stuck in the Middle with You, and episode 11, Regarding Dean. The worst episodes are First Blood, episode 9, The Memory Remains, episode 18, and Family Feud, episode 13. Okay, I sort of skirted around something a few times during my season 12 review, and that something is that Lucifer possessed the President of the United States. Presidents in media is something that's always fascinated me ever since I saw the Quinn Reviews video on it, and so now I get to talk about that in Supernatural, especially because there seems to be some, how I should say, debate about a mention of Trump in season 13. Okay, now hear me out. Please do not leave the video. If you want, you can skip to the season 13 section, but I have to talk about this. There's a mention of Trump in season 13, episode 9 from Kaya, and we know that Jefferson Rooney is president in season 12. So how was Trump the president in season 13? Well, a few things. First, we know the show will occasionally dip its toes into real life situations. Obama was mentioned multiple times in seasons 5 and 7, specifically when it comes to the president. So we know he was, at one point, president of the United States. And judging by the fact that season 5 and 7 take place between 2009 and 2012, we can assume he became president at the same time, in our time. We also know George W. Bush was a president at some point, as noted by this image of Castillo staring at an image of George W. Bush. Now, the next logical assumption is that Barack Obama's poll numbers dropped drastically following the 2009-2010 Judeo-Christian apocalypse, leading to a failed re-election campaign in which Jefferson Rooney, a Republican, is elected to be the next president and promises to serve only a single term to help recover America. Do I have any evidence for this? Absolutely not. But it does solve something, and that's that Rooney is in season 12's first half, which takes place in the fall of 2016. What happened in the fall of 2016? Donald Trump was elected president. When does the mid-season finale of season 13 take place? Presumably sometime in 2017, because we know that the finale of season 12 was May in 2017, meaning that Donald Trump would have been inaugurated as president. So Kaya's mention of trying to make it in Trump's America is not a retcon, but simply fits into the timeline of presidential elections. We also know that Hillary Clinton exists, as in a season 15 episode, it's revealed in the multiverse that she became president, presumably in 2016. So we can also infer that she ran against Trump in the main universe's 2016. So what does this all mean? Absolutely nothing. Let's go ahead and move on to season 13. Please tell me you're still watching. Season 13 ran from October 12th, 2017 to May 17th, 2018. It has 23 episodes, and the main storyline is the apocalypse world and rescuing Mary Winchester. Well, we're finally here. We finally reached a season on my rewatch that I've only seen one time, and that's when it was airing. I originally had no idea how I felt about this season. It was sort of just a bunch of question marks in my mind. I remember it having a lot of cool ideas, and of course, I remembered Scoobynatural and the finale, but I never really thought much about the individual episodes or storylines. I do have to say now, though, after rewatching it, I quite like this season. There are a lot of really cool ideas for Monster of the Week episodes, and the introductions of both Jack and the multiverse adds a ton to the season. The first half of the season is actually kind of really great. While I understand that the season 12 finale loses a bit of steam since practically every character returns afterward, the first half of season 13 is genuinely one of the most compelling parts of the show when it comes to Dean's character for me. He's absolutely lost, and Sam's just trying to cling on to hope, and I find that to be really interesting. The first half of season 13 is light on plot and very focused on telling stories with these characters, and it's something that I really love and have to commend. Episodes 1 and 2 don't even get Sam and Dean to the bunker. Those two episodes just take their time and allow you to sit in this new status quo after they lost everyone. The two best episodes of the first half of season 13 deserve special recognition because I think they're really phenomenal. Episode 4, The Big Empty, and episode 5, Advanced Thanatology. The Big Empty is just a wonderful episode that deals with grief in such a real and compelling way. This episode aired literally the week I was attending my grandmother's funeral, so safe to say that it made a huge impact on me when it aired. All of this happening while Castiel literally annoys a primordial being back into letting him coming back to life is, honestly, it's peak fiction. An Advanced Thanatology starts out like your traditional Monster of the Week episode, but with a twist. Yeah, Dean's suicidal. The dude can barely work, he's about to give up, and seeing Sam do these weird gestures for him out of the kindness of his heart is half heartwarming and half sad because he really doesn't know what to do with his brother feeling like this. All of this turns around though halfway through as Dean kills himself to enter the veil. It's such an insane moment because they had so many better ways to handle this case, but Dean wanted it out and I really love it. The episode ends up getting really awesome after that as Dean and Billy talk about the fact that Sam and Dean are needed. Needed for what? I had no idea, and neither did the writers, but this is what I was talking about earlier. It's setup that can be expanded upon later in really solid ways. Another thing that bolsters the first half of the season is Jack. I love this character. Introducing a new character later into your show is always a gamble, especially when later in your show means season 13. You never know if the character will be received well, and when your cast is basically just 2 to 3 people, introducing a new one is even more costly for those same reasons. So it's great that Jack is a pretty wonderful addition. He's such a simple character, and yet he's all the more compelling because of it. It almost works just to see how Sam and Dean are able to imprint on him. I really love how they raise this kid into becoming basically just as good a person as they are. There's also parallels between Sam and Jack, which added a lot to the character work for me in the opening half of the season. For all the shit that villains talk throughout the show about Sam and Dean being terrible monsters that kill people for fun or whatever, the fact that they raised the devil's kid to be a good guy. It really just shows that above all else, Sam and Dean are chaotic good. Speaking of the devil, he's back this season. This was the first season since season 5 where Mark Pellegrino feels like a force to be reckoned with as Lucifer, and I actually really like him here. Now you can argue that he's too goofy, and I won't necessarily argue against that, but like I said, I always felt like Lucifer was a bit of a goofball in season 5, so this is just an extension of it. Plus there are numerous moments where he cuts the shit and gets genuinely scary, and Mark Pellegrino just carries the role. They do trip you up by the end of the season though, and I got really worried that they'd attempt to redeem Lucifer, which I just viewed as something that never needed to happen at all. Luckily they don't, and if anything, he's more evil than he's probably ever been. He manipulates his son into handing over his power so that he can destroy the universe. His death was great, and the climax of the finale is really good, except for that wire fight. That was really bad. Did you know that the VFX team apologized on Twitter ahead of the episode? Kind of crazy that they just left it in, honestly. But yeah, seeing Lucifer interact with Jack and Gabriel in the final few episodes was also a really cool addition to the season. Oh yeah, Gabriel's back. It's sort of a mixed bag, unfortunately. On one hand, I don't mind the retcon itself. I think him dying to sort of just finally have an out is pretty good, but I also don't really get why they killed him off in season 13 now. They essentially just redid his arc, and while it's good, that's because the arc was good in the first place in season 5. I don't want to say that I don't like his involvement, I did, but I'm just baffled at the choice they made ending. At least we got a couple good episodes out of it, and I really like the episode where him, Sam, and Dean team up to kill Norse gods. That's a really fun one. I guess I could talk about the resurrections now. I think they're pretty good. In fact, basically all of the characters' returns lead to pretty good things. For Castiel, it led to the introduction of the Empty, which is one of the coolest things to come from this era, and it finally gave him the kick in the ass he needed to get his edge back. Seriously, it feels like seasons 4 to 5 Castiel is back. This dude's a complete badass this season. There's an episode where Donatello gets corrupted by the demon tablet, and Sam and Dean are just pleading with this dude not to kill him, and it's just really cool. Like, it feels like this is the Castiel that only has, like, the mission at heart, and for him to end everything by just making Donatello brain dead was just raw as hell. And Rowena is terrific. Her death really shocked her to her core as Lucifer tortured her and killed her brutally, and her final moments were filled with fear and hopelessness. What follows is one of the best redemption arcs I've seen in a TV show like this. The story is completely believable, and her 180 is really nice, and it just makes her a character that I absolutely love to have around. And her scene with Sam in Various and Sundry Villains, I think is the episode, where Sam talks about how he just kept pushing down the trauma he had from Lucifer because the world kept needing saving, is one of the most heartbreaking moments of his entire character, I think. Sadly though, not every resurrection is that great this season. Arthur Ketch just sort of exists and wades through the motions, never really working for me, and his return episode is bogged down by a really dumb twin brother twist that just turned out to be a ploy. And Naomi is just fine. I never cared for her in season 8, and I guess Heaven needed a new boss now that all the angels are dying, but it just felt like a weird character to bring back. The middle of the season is where it starts to go down in quality a bit, kind of like season 12, but I still think it's a bit better. Well, there's still fantastic episodes like Breakdown, A Most Holy Man, and of course, Scoobynatural. We get some episodes here and there that push the things forward, like there's, the arc about Lucifer consuming angel grace to get more powerful, the arc about Lucifer running heaven, but some of these things just never really go anywhere. Again, it's a lot more character focused, and it's not unlike many other seasons, but I still feel like I didn't have that push that I wanted. It doesn't help that the major antagonist for the bulk of the middle of the season just really blows. Asmodeus looks menacing, has a cool name, and just having another Prince of Hell as a villain is really dope, but he's just pretty annoying, and he really was evil Colonel Sanders. Him working with Ketch was also an issue because, again, I'm not a fan of Ketch, so anytime they were on screen I felt like I wanted to go on a snooze cruise. In a season chock full of like glup shitto resurrections, did it never occur to the writers to bring back Azazel? Like, I'm not saying that he should have come back, but when you have like Naomi coming back, just bring back Azazel. The only other villain aside from Lucifer, who I already talked about, was the alternative world Michael. He had a bit of the rule of cool thing going for him. I just think he was kind of dope, but he doesn't really do much, and once you see the final cliffhanger, you kind of understand that he was just set up for his involvement in season 14. Still, I think he's a compelling enough little ticking time bomb that Sam and Dean have to work against, and then most of the stuff in Apocalypse World is kind of hit or miss. It doesn't help that Mary's storyline there is basically non-existent once Lucifer gets to the Prime Earth, but it gets a bit more interesting once we get to see Jack there and see more of the conflict conflicts that Earth is going through. They honestly don't use the multiverse for as much fan service as I expected. Surely we get Charlie, but aside from her and Bobby that we got last season, there really wasn't much else, which is kind of good, I guess. The climax of the season taking place there was a good idea though, since Sam and Dean's entire mission of the season was to get there and get their mom back. I just wish it felt more linear getting from there to the actual finale. Andrew Dabb sort of has this issue a few times, both in season 12 and 13's finales. Their penultimate episodes feel more like the finale, so the finale feels like Monster of the Week, or even just a premiere for the next season before finally kicking into gear. Believe it or not, there's still a lot to talk about when it comes to season 13. For one, I haven't even touched the backdoor pilot that the season spends a few episodes setting up. The backdoor pilot, nicknamed Wayward Sisters, was planned to set up a show that would have focused on Jody Mills, Claire Novak, Alex Jones, Donna Hanscom, and newcomers Patience and Kaya. It was an interesting idea, and I won't lie, it's a little upsetting that the network didn't go through with it, but I think it's a good thing then that the season never truly feels consumed by the setup. Patience is introduced in episode 3, and Kaya isn't even introduced until the mid-season finale. Unfortunately, this does make the mid-season finale and premiere feel divorced from the actual narrative. While I have no real issue with the Wayward Sisters episode itself, the fact that it gets more priority over Sam and Dean in a wooded dinosaur land eating lizards is pretty sad. Still, I figured I should go ahead and mention it since it's a pretty large part of the season, and I'd be, stupid not to mention it. The last thing I want to mention about the season is, in my opinion, they finally fixed the dreaded Monster of the Week episode. And basically every season since season 6, the show really struggled to balance its Monster of the Week episodes and its plot, even feeling the two were completely divorced in parts of separate shows in seasons 9 and 10. Not only did they break the flow and pace of the storylines, but they were just really boring. Season 13 fixes this issue in two ways. One, it combines plot and filler to create what I call filler plot. I mentioned this in season's 11 segment, I believe. These are episodes where the main plot is Monster of the Week while a character like Castiel does plot relevant things in the background, or the filler episode transitions to plot halfway through via a twist or some other connection. And the second thing that they help is that the filler episodes are just really cool. There's a Most Holy Man, which literally has a mob shootout, which is really cool. I think it's one of the few episodes that have no supernatural creatures in it at all. Episode 11, Breakdown, is probably my favorite episode of the season. I just like how it's kind of like a grounded crime episode. I'm definitely not into true crime. That shit kind of weirds me out, but I do like things sort of adjacent to it. I mean, my favorite movie is Zodiac, and I'm a huge fan of the show Mindhunter. So to have a supernatural episode that for 75% of it is just an episode about Sam and Dean helping catch a serial killer is really fun to me. And then the twist that the serial killer is actually just the cop who's been chasing him is really cool. This is another episode that I just recommend just for the novelty of it. When you're this far into the show, you really do need to start doing some novelty things. Most shows would start doing this way earlier, but Supernatural had a bit of a dull point in the middle. And then the twist that the serial killer is also using a monster red room to auction off human body parts is just a nice little supernatural twist on the whole thing. It's one of the darkest and most uncomfortable and yet just really awesome episodes of the entire show. And yeah, I just really wanted to mention that. Overall, I do really like season 13. It definitely has its issues here and there, like struggling to maintain momentum with its main plot, or the fact that the main antagonist for the largest portion of the season really just sucks. But when it all comes down to it, I think it's a very entertaining season full of character stuff that's very well done, and just several standout episodes that I really, really like. For my rating, I'll give it an 8 out of 10. My favorite episodes are Breakdown, episode 11, Advanced Thanatology, episode 5, and The Big Empty, episode 4. My least favorite episodes are Patience, episode 3, The Thing, episode 17, and then probably episode 13, Devil's Bargain. Now, before we talk about season 14, I think I need to have a guest on to talk about the epicest episode of Supernatural, Scoobynatural.
What the? Bandicoot with pants on? Okay, he do be looking kind of fresh.
Where the hell am I? Oh shit, I'm in Yinland. Well, while I'm here, I might as well get Zach to do some slave labor for me.
We're not just in any cartoon. We're in Scooby-Doo.
Alright, I'm not gonna lie. Scoobynatural is one of the things that sold me into watching this show. As a big Scoob head, the prospect of a Scooby-Doo Supernatural crossover was just enough of an incentive to get me through any highs or lows Supernatural had to offer, just so that I could see my boys Sam and Dean hitch a ride in the Mystery Machine with the coolest gang alive. Yo, it's editing Zach here. It turns out I lied. Sam and Dean do not hitch a ride in the Mystery Machine in this episode. With season 13 introducing the multiverse, it'd be easy to assume that Scoobynatural is in an alternate world where Sam and Dean are cartoon characters. Surprisingly though, the writers instead go for a more goofy approach, where Sam and Dean are trapped in a haunted television. Sam and Dean get transported to the 1960s Scooby-Doo TV show, equipped with Dean Winchester, the better of the two brothers, fight me Jay, being a massive Scooby-Doo fan.
That's the freaking Scooby Gang.
Never before have I felt more represented in a piece of media than seeing Dean Winchester hype as fuck to hang out with Shaggy and Scooby.
It's a pleasure to meet you. Nice to meet you too.
Now this episode is mostly an homage to classic Scooby-Doo. Hosting the same plot as A Night of Fright is No Delight, Scoob and the gang are haunted by Colonel Beauregard Sanders, an eccentric businessman evading taxes. Yo Jay, should we do that? But in a twist of events, Scoobynatural makes the ghost real, and we get this fascinating look at the Scooby-Doo characters, equipped with all of the classic tropes you've grown to love in Scooby-Doo, going absolutely insane as they come to grips with monsters being real. This is something that other Scooby-Doo shows would do, but seeing this in the original 1960s show, it's insanely funny.
Are you okay?
Like, do I look like I'm okay?
Scoob and the gang lose their shit, all while Dean is trying to hook up with Daphne at every turn.
Dibs on Daphne.
The cool thing about this episode is it's a very good introductory episode to Supernatural, at least the later seasons. The main plot is very light. I mean, I guess Castiel comes in with the fruit from the Tree of Life. Why didn't they show that? The world will never know.
Son of a bitch! Every time!
But I can't complain too much because this is, without a doubt, the best episode of Supernatural. I mean, I guess Swan Song is pretty good, but like, does it have a talking dog?
What are you doing?
The title card or intro is arguably one of the most important parts of a television show. When executed right, you can absolutely know nothing about a television program, but you'll know the title card or intro. Take Breaking Bad, Better Call Saul, Game of Thrones, Family Guy,
Is violence in movies and sex on TV?
Lost. All of these have such memorable logos and title cards, and I think that Supernatural's title cards are some of the most important elements of the show. When you have 15 seasons, all of these title cards are very indicative and thematically relevant to the storylines of each season. So why don't we go ahead and break down every Supernatural title card in what I call a crash course to title cards. Welcome everybody to my class, a crash course in title cards by Professor Zoomster. So let's go ahead and get into this lesson. So let's go ahead and start out with season 1. Animation took way too long. Anyway, season 1, low-key classic title card. Gotta love it. I like the simplicity, but I do think is a little too simple. And it's just not as epic as I would like. You got that whoosh, whoosh. I also could make it in Sony Vegas. Alright, so season 2 is very fiery. I don't really understand it because the house fire was a season 1 plotline. So it's kind of silly. Kind of cheesy too. But it's a little epic. So I think that you get a little bit of an excuse for it because it is kind of epic. So, it is, yeah. Alright, now moving on to season 3. This honestly the most 2000 shit I've ever seen. It's very silly. It's very dumb. I don't like it. It looks like a bad 2000s blockbuster movie logo. Alright, now moving on to season 4. We finally get into some epic shit. This one hits, bro. I love the angel wings. It's very epic. It's thematically relevant to the season. We get the introduction of angels. I love the red text. It's finally not like too gaudy or anything. They're not trying to go too hard with it. I maybe could make it in Sony Vegas, but even if I couldn't, it's still a banger. Big fan of the season 4 title card. Moving on to season 5. This is my favorite title card for real. The screams in this one is really cool. I love the bloody stuff. It's pretty great. Not very thematically relevant. Honestly, I don't quite get what they were going for. Maybe you could have included something related to the apocalypse, but it's still banger. It's a great simple title card, but it has enough flair to just really hit you with being epic. And I could absolutely make it in Sony Vegas because I had an intro that was just a ripoff of it for several years on my YouTube channel. Moving on to season 6. This one's so cool, thematically relevant. Like the glass breaking is like Sam's wall breaking, so kind of peak, honestly. I do not like that it is about 60 decibels higher than the rest of the episode. You really got to turn this shit down when you watching the episode. So so now we got season 7. Much like the season itself, very cool idea, mediocre execution. The goop is a nice touch, though. I do like the goop. And I probably could not make it in Sony Vegas. A little too much goop, I think, for Sony Vegas to handle. Moving on to season 8, I like the symbols for the tablets. It's a cool look. Unfortunately, though, it's kind of just whatever. Like, it matches the season, but I'm not really going to think about the season 8 title card too much. And I could definitely probably make it in Adobe After Effects. All right, so season 9 sucks ass, but this title card's raw as hell, and I could probably make it in Adobe After Effects, I think. Alright, so like, the blue is nice and all aesthetically, but this is probably the most generic title card you've ever seen. Like, when you think Supernatural logo, you probably think in this title card. Like, it really has nothing to do with Season 10. Like, Season 10 literally has the mark of Cain. Like, that's a symbol right there. Just put that behind the fucking logo. Like, what is... Season 11... It's a great season. I love it. One of my favorites of the show. This title card blows. Alright, so season 12. We get into, the supernatural renaissance of seasons like I've talked about here, but title cards also kind of go through a renaissance. I love the middle letters logo here. I like how it's like seared in to the material. The burning effect is sick. It's just unique and exciting title card for the season. It sets a nice tone, and you see this and you really get the season 12 vibes. So I like that a lot. Another banger, season 13. I love that it's Jack's eye right here. The upside down T being an upside down cross is phenomenal. Just a wonderful title card. I really like the season 13 title card, and bonus points for the Scoobynatural variant that exists. You could probably make it in Adobe After Effects. This one's just cool as hell, okay? I mean, it's thematically relevant. You got the blue for, Michael's eyes. The angel wings are really cool. The blue logo. I love the aesthetic of it all. It's really, really cool. So yeah, Season 14's title card's pretty great. A lot of people said it looks like a video game. I don't really care. I think it slaps. It reminds me of Season 9's, and I love Season 9's, so. And what is this? Like, I was so excited to get, like, another red aesthetic for a Supernatural season because it's my favorite color. But what is this supposed to be? Like, I've seen people say it's the gunshot wound on Sam that he shot God with. But, like, I mean, even the then and now section for Season 15 is the Impala. So why don't they just do the Impala with the Supernatural logo over it for the intro? I don't get it. There you go. That's my opinion on every Supernatural title card. Now, what does this all mean? Absolutely nothing. Season 14 aired from October 11th, 2018 to April 25th, 2019. It consists of 20 episodes, the shortest season so far not to be interrupted by a writer's strike, and the myth arc is Apocalypse World Michael and the battle for Jack Klein's soul. What a season, man. What an absolute season. Did you know that this season constantly ranks among the lowest of the show? I guess I can sort of understand why, but on the other side of the fence, I really do like this season. It's sort of bonkers, but also really has a ton of episodes that I love a lot. So it's time to defend season 14 and explain why it's in my top 6 seasons of the show. Because if season 13 was Supernatural at its most schlocky fun for me, then season 14 is the show at its most angsty and depressing. It's not an issue though, because I actually really like the tone and atmosphere of a lot of the season. There's not much of a major storyline throughout. I mean, even Andrew Dabb and Robert Singer said that the season was going to be more episodic and focusing on characters, and I think that's pretty cool. It felt like they took what worked in the first half of season 13 and just made it the entire season. Sure, it can end up feeling like there's not a plan at all, which there probably wasn't, but I still really dig it. The season also continues to have really great episodes. It's come with some of the best of not only the post-Kripke era, but some of the best of the entire show. Steve Yockey delivers banger after banger. This dude is one of my favorite writers of the entire show and the best writer of this last era, whether it's the wonderful necromancy love story and optimism or the insanely sick mid-season premiere nihilism. And then there's Ouroboros, which I used to hate, but now I think it's really really good. And then there's Peace of Mind, where Sam is converted into some 1950s house husband, where he tells Castiel that he needs to have his mouth washed out with soap. I will say, I think that when you really do look at it, season 13 is a bit better, and season 14 has a few more issues when it comes to structure and pacing. It's sort of the opposite of season 13, where the first half is a little weak, but I do really love the second half. The premiere of the season doesn't work really as well as I'd hoped, in all honesty. I think they just didn't know how they wanted to paint the story around Michael having control of Dean, so it just feels like we flop around for a bit before going anywhere. And it also doesn't help how long we spend on Jack dying. He's dying because his body cannot sustain the, I guess, genetic makeup of being a Nephilim. They don't really explain it too well, but I guess I understand. It makes sense. And I like the plot line, and I like how they bring him back in such a reckless manner. Usually I'd really dislike that, but I don't know, something about seeing how close they are with Jack now just made it work a lot better. I just wish it was a single episode instead of two of them, because I really love aspects of both episodes 7 and 8, but individually they make the story a lot weaker. Luckily we get a really cool thing with the empty invading heaven, which is just one of the coolest set pieces of the show, and we get Castiel making his very important deal that will come up in season 15. It also doesn't help that they essentially bench Michael around episode 2 and he just fades into the background. On a rewatch, it's pretty clear that they're setting up a return to Dean's body, and it pays off pretty well in the mid-season finale, an episode that I think is really awesome, but getting there is a little rough. Luckily, the Michael stuff goes in a fantastic direction following the mid-season premiere. It's such an awesome idea to have Dean literally trap Michael in his head, and the entirety of Nihilism is a stellar episode. One of my favorite episodes of the entire show. I just think it's such a unique idea to like go into Dean's head and watch him continuously live out this fantasy. And you know, getting Pamela back was really cool as well. And of course, I really like what follows with Dean's mission to build a Malik box and trap himself in it to stop Michael. It's honestly just another repeat of season 10, which was a repeat of season 3, but I almost feel like I like this about as much as season 3 and way more than season 10. I just love the melancholy nature of everything. I really like how there's an entire episode that is just Dean having a farewell tour and eating dinner with his mom. Like it's just such a nice little character focused episode, and it's one thing that you really get when you can like scale back and not every episode has to deal with some major world ending threat. Like this is a really personal thing for Dean, and it's really cool. Despite being one of the most angsty and depressing seasons of the show, it just has so much heart. These characters feel real, and they're going through things that could feel melodramatic, but I always felt like they were really well handled. And I really like how the story ramps up too. I'm a huge fan of the episode Ouroboros. I said I used to dislike it, but I just love how it handles everything now. There's a lot of really dope things going on thematically, especially with Jack and him constantly burning off his soul. I mean, there's a shot of him in a black shirt holding a snake in one of these upcoming episodes, and it's such a cool moment. And then there's the whole like poem about, you know, the snake or the chicken, and you know, a cycle of death and rebirth, and I just find that to be such an interesting thing thematically. I wish it was explored a little bit more, because I mean, Ouroboros is literally a symbol for, you know, dying and being reborn, which Jack essentially does when he kills Michael and takes his grace. And it would have been cool to see it expanded upon much more, but I know this is a CW show, and I shouldn't have even expected them to do something like this. So it's really cool, and I really like the dread that you get as Jack uses his powers and burns off his soul. You know exactly where everything's going to go, and it is just great. And I really love how the episode switches from a Monster of the Week episode into the climax of the Michael storyline. I won't pretend that it doesn't feel a little rushed and out of nowhere, because it absolutely does, and I feel like it's just because they decided that they weren't going to continue the show past season 15. So I feel like Andrew Dabb really just condensed a bunch of stuff into the end of season 14. But I really do like it, because Dean's been so careful and worried about Michael getting out, so him escaping during a routine hunt is a really cool way to execute the ending. I think what could have made it better is just have Michael escape at the end of episode 14 and have an episode 15 completely dedicated to stopping Michael, but I don't really know how you'd fill an entire episode with that, but I'm sure they could have figured it out. And Jack killing Michael after all of season 13 and now most of 14 was a great way to end that character arc, especially since he lost his soul and got his powers back, yet again going to like dying and being reborn. Alright. Now, before I talk about episodes 15 through 20, which are a group of episodes that I think really ties this whole season together for me, and I just really love them, I'm going to air out all of my grievances with it and talk about the dumb stuff that this season does, because it's not a whole lot, but there's a really big chunk of it that is just too stupid not to talk about. The first thing, and that is Nick. I kind of like the idea of Nick surviving. I like seeing how Lucifer imprinted himself on him, especially as a parallel with how Michael imprinted himself on Dean. We don't really get that with Sam because he wasn't possessed for very long, but we do sort of get it in season 7 with the hallucinations. It's a really cool idea. My major issue with it is it never goes anywhere, and instead Nick is just a weird serial killer. He just goes around killing people in several episodes, and the story is completely stupid with it. The story stops being about how Nick was corrupted by Lucifer and starts becoming about how Nick has always been fucked up. It's a little lame, and it stops adding anything at all to the season and just becomes a burden. There are quite a few episodes where the subplot of it is just Nick doing some silly serial killer plot, and I lose interest completely. Like, take back that episode where I was talking about Dean just having dinner and going on a farewell tour. There's a subplot in that episode. In fact, I think it may just be the main plot of Nick just being a goober, and while I love the stuff with Dean, the stuff with Nick just drags the episode down just a ton. I think it resolves decently enough with Jack killing him, and seeing Lucifer return was a little scary, not because I'm scared of Lucifer, but I just don't want the character back. But at the end of the day, it was a plot line that just feels like a waste to have in the season. Again, it's cool that Jack was able to burn him alive though, because Nick sucked. And then there's Michael. I haven't talked about him much, and that's because he's kind of a giant disappointment of a villain. He spends the bulk of the first half of the season assembling some monster army, despite the fact that he is, again, mostly off screen after episode 2. All of this is eventually dropped as the season just changes to being about Dean trying to keep Michael at bay, which is a lot more compelling of a direction for the season, but I just can't get over how it feels like several things were completely dropped. Michael's monster army is an interesting idea, and I really like some of the episodes and how they deal with it. Episode 5 is pretty cool, especially how you get like multiple moments of just like the monster of that episode, the Jinn thinking that Dean is Michael. It's a really, really cool touch. My main issue is that it's established that Michael's army is vast and full of hundreds of monsters, and yet they're dispatched really easily in the mid-season premiere. I get that they say Jack wiped them out, and since there were all surrounding the bunker, I guess it makes sense. But I mean, you know that Garth is still around, so there's still more Michael monsters. I think having a few filler episodes would have gone a long way to making the plotline work a lot better. Instead, they just never really bring them up again. Like, we have a dumb Wendigo ripoff of an episode later this season when we could have just gotten another Michael monster. It makes no sense. There's also the other hunters, and they're sort of a team Supernatural, if you want to call it that. Sam was leading them, and I definitely don't mind these characters, and when they died, I wouldn't say I felt anything, but I did feel a little bad for Sam, and I think there's a decent amount of interesting character work we get out of him when it came to him leading an army of hunters. It especially felt like a natural progression from season 12's British Men of Letters storyline, but unfortunately, these other hunters never really felt much like characters, with the exception of Maggie. It's just a little frustrating because one of the issues I've had with the show is how they constantly kill off their side characters, and then they just proceed to start building up a couple side characters, and then they're just dead. And I guess I really should talk about the 300th episode. It's fine. I enjoy it. It has a few issues for me though. For one, the time travel makes next to no sense. Zachariah is brought back, and I mean, that's a fun return, but he mentions that since John is in the future and the main timeline has changed, that they can't really do the apocalypse, which doesn't really make sense because the show was kicked off because John vanished in like 2005, so wouldn't everything have just happened 2 years earlier since they chucked John from 2003? But I guess the change is they needed John to break the first seal in hell, but Dean's the one that breaks the first seal in hell, so you don't really need John to die like they had. I just don't get how this changes everything. Also, why can a magic wish with a pearl like completely like change the machinations of someone like God and the darkness as well? And that's not even getting into the fact that John is like quasi redeemed in the episode and it doesn't feel earned at all. He's still a terrible father. He abused his kids. You know, it's an episode with some fun elements and some good dialogue, but at the end of the day, it's just a really confounding episode that doesn't nearly hold up as much as I'd like. Okay, now we can talk about the good stuff. The final chunk of this season is so awesome. I don't even care. So I know how I said I felt like the season was a bit of a mess with its main storyline, and it is, but they managed to tie it all together in one simple way, by making Jack the villain of the season. Jack is such a damn compelling villain because we've seen him raised over the past season and a half, and him losing his soul just makes sense, and it was captivating to watch. I love how subtly it starts too. He realizes the snake he adopted was lonely, so he killed it to make it all better. It's such a cool way to go about it, and as Castiel points out, he didn't see evil in Jack, but instead saw an absence of good. You know, he doesn't have a soul anymore. He doesn't understand. It's a nice addition and expansion upon soullessness as well. And honestly, for a lot of it, you can still kind of defend Jack and see his point of view, and then he kills Mary. The final 3 episodes of the season are some of the craziest and most tense the show has been since like season 5, and I love it. I love seeing Jack worry, realizing what he did was wrong, but never quite feeling bad about it. Seeing Sam and Dean go through all of this was captivating too. Was Mary fridged? Yes, but I still think it works anyway. Mary has always been a character whose story had to end in her dying again, in my opinion, and this was was a great way to go about it. Bonus points for when Duma said that Mary Winchester is complete and happy in heaven. We love to hear that. So cool. Episode 19, Jack in the Box, is honestly the episode that ties the entire season together for me. Jack's being manipulated by heaven to make new angels, which is a pretty cool subplot that was brought up back in season 13. Dean decides to use the Malik box on Jack, which ties that into the season now, and everything is still all fallout from deciding to bring Jack back to life in the first place. All my issues with the pacing and structure slowly fall away as the season takes form and the puzzle pieces really click into place. Now, was this always planned? It's very hard to tell, but I still think it comes together so nicely. I feel like when you view season 14 through the lens I just brought up, it's a lot easier to understand my like for the season. And then there's the finale. I love the finale, but I will acknowledge some of the issues with it. The episode is just fascinating to look into what makes a supernatural finale, especially one of the ones from seasons 8 through 11 where every finale felt like it was the exact same thing. It tricks you by making you think you're getting into that again before pulling the rug out from under you in such a meta way, and it's just so cool. Sure, there's some issues with Chuck just being a villain out of nowhere with a heel turn, and it doesn't quite work the same way that they wanted. It doesn't feel like it's the same character from season 11. My little headcanon is that, having Amara and Chuck out at the same time has sort of made their destructive and creative essences like blend into one, because we know that Amara slowly started to love what God created, and we know that Chuck, slowly started to hate what he created, which I can feel like sort of the yin and yang alpha and omega thing, especially since in season 15 they sort of become one. It works a little bit, and I understand if people don't like it, but that's just what helps me rationalize it. Chuck in the episode is still really cool though. In the episode, not only a writer but as an audience member, he's really cool. I just love how the writers are able to craft a finale that follows all the generic tropes of a supernatural finale, only to just shove you in a completely new direction. It's really looked at in a way that, people can watch it who aren't paying attention to all the meta things, and they can just be like, oh yeah, they're doing it again. But when you really understand and like obsess over the show like I do, you can really figure out what they're doing. So yeah, at the end of the day, I really do like season 14, but I want to give a special shout out to the episode 12, Profit and Loss. It is such a great episode, not only in the writing of it, but in its visual presentation. It's just really cool. I talked about last episode how the show lost a lot of its visual style, and this episode, while not perfect, it's one that always has been such a nice episode to look at, and I really like to go back to it and just rewatch scenes because some of these shots are really good, the lighting is really great, the camera is just positioned in great moments sometimes. I just think it's got a lot of cool cinematography things, and the writing is cool with the Prophet being activated too early, and there's a lot of really great Sam and Dean moments within the episode. Just another one of those more character-driven episodes that I really like. So yeah, those are my thoughts on season 14. It's a really strong season for me as far as character work goes, and at the same time, I think it's just really fun and it's an enjoyable season. It's definitely helped a lot by the second half, especially those final 6 or so episodes. Just makes everything come together. Jack's arc is amazing, and I love the Dean character work with him as well. Michael gets some cool things in the season, but he's just a little underwhelming, and I definitely understand why some people may not love the season, but I hope I was able to offer a bit of a different perspective. It's not my favorite, but it's still very far from my least favorite. Overall, I give season 14 an 8 out of 10. My favorite episodes are Jack in the Box, episode 19, Mariah, episode 20, and Profit and Loss, episode 12. My least favorite episodes are The Spear, episode 3, Stranger in a Strange Land, episode 1, and Damaged Goods, episode 11.
Son of a bitch! Every time!
Alright, so one of the largest complaints thrown at Andrew Dabb's Era is the constant retconning and numerous issues with continuity that people find. I'm not at all trying to say that you're wrong if you feel this way, but I always viewed retconning and continuity issues to be way more prevalent in the Carver Era. Examples include anything to do with Reapers, especially making them being secret angels. It just makes no sense, especially because we saw Azazel possess one in season 2, so are we supposed to just believe demons can possess angels now? Yeah. And then there's Purgatory, because Reapers can get into Purgatory now after Crowley spent forever trying to crack it open. There's also the issue with Lucifer and Michael and who was the firstborn. The entire reason that the Michael and Dean and Lucifer and Sam Vessel's dynamic works as well as it does is because Michael is the older brother and Lucifer is the younger son. And yet, in season 11, it's said that Lucifer is the older son. Point is, there's a ton, even in prior eras of the show like the Kripke era. However, now that we've talked about 14 seasons, canon discrepancies and continuity continuity errors are bound to appear, but I really wanted to talk about what I consider a retcon and what I don't, because I feel like in this fandom things can get a little confusing. First off, I want to discuss the concept of an Archangel blade, because I've seen it all over Reddit and just in comment sections of videos of people getting annoyed at this, and I wanted to say that this was not introduced in season 13. Flashback to season 5, episode 19, Hammer of the Gods. Gabriel reveals that what he carries is his own Archangel blade, which is capable of killing an Archangel. And who wrote that episode? Andrew Dabb. See what I mean about him bringing back things he introduced in previous seasons and expanding upon them? It's pretty cool. And the change of the Archangel blade's design is just the show changing them to differentiate them from a weapon that Sam and Dean use way more frequently than they do in season 5. It's not a change to the lore or anything, it is just the change of a prop. Another thing I've seen people commenting about is that Michael couldn't have left a piece of him inside Dean in season 14 because that had never been done before. There's two things with that. One, just because it never been done before doesn't mean it couldn't happen at all. Michael is an Archangel and the rules of possession could easily be different. Two, Michael is an Archangel from another universe, so the rules of possession are probably unlikely to be one-to-one with the rules in the main universe. I don't really think that expanding upon lore counts as retconning for me, but I guess if it does for you, that's just you. If anything, this just proves the feeling that I had, which is that seasons 12 through 15 are some of the most continuity focused in the entire show after seasons 1 through 5. We get the Alpha Vampire at the cult back in season 12. Season 13 gave us the return of Missouri Mosley, even though she was randomly killed off, which, come on, Supernatural, you bring back one of your few black supporting characters you've ever had and then kill them in their first appearance in over 12 years? What gives?
Yo, wait. Yo, that's fucking Chillblade, bro. Oh, shit.
We get an expansion upon the Princes of Hell. We had Azazel for 2 seasons and then nothing for like 10 seasons of the show. You'd have thought Jeremy Carver's run, which expanded upon Heaven and Hell, would have done something with them, but no. It wasn't until a huge piece of the demon hierarchy was revealed in season 12 that everything kind of clicks into place. And I already talked about him revisiting concepts like Jesse Turner to create Jack, and there's all the things with Mary not being perfect and her relationship with John being flawed. All things he would introduce in episodes of the show way before these seasons. Some people might call some of these fan services like some of the returning characters, but I definitely appreciate a show that's gone on for this long and recognizing its own history. And of course, within his own seasons, Andrew Dabb has a lot of cool continuity things. An example is the device that the British Men of Letters use in season 12 to enter Mary's mind. They can now use that to enter Dean's mind in season 14. We also get the return of the hyperbolic pulse generator, which allowed them to kick Lucifer out of President Rooney. The Malik box makes a return within season 14 as something that was set up and paid off. It's really cool because I feel like a lot of the Carver era would just introduce things and then drop them as quickly as they would move on to the next thing. Now sure, there's definitely issues. There's a lot of things I haven't talked about. Season 15, which we'll talk about in a moment, is full of actual canon discrepancies, some of which pissed me off, but my main point was just to highlight things I like from this era when it comes to continuity and canon, and to point out that there's always been issues like this in Supernatural. It's just whether or not that detracts from the story for you. For me personally, it doesn't detract too much. Supernatural season 15 began October 10th, 2019 and ended and concluded the show on November 19th, 2020. It consists of 20 episodes and the main myth arc is attacking and dethroning God. Alright, so I have a little video on season 15. You might have seen it. It's only my second most popular video. I wasn't very nice to the show's final run of episodes. I thought it was an inconsistent mess of a season that did little more than disappoint me at pretty much every turn. However, I did rewatch it for this series and I have to say I feel more or less the same. I'm definitely a lot nicer on it, and I still agree with my original video, so the segment may seem a bit redundant than some of the other seasons because of that, but I do still enjoy elements of it a lot more than I initially did, even if I think the season as a whole is still just a huge mess. From the first episode, season 15 sets itself off on a single mission, to let down everyone who is hyped after the season 14 finale, and boy does it accomplish that. It picks up right where 14 left off, with hell broken open and everything from a woman in white to a killer clown walking free on Earth. Originally, I was so very excited to see where things go, but now having seen the final season already, I braced myself for impact, as I knew it was going to let me down. And yeah, it still did. I think the opening arc truly struggles because I don't know what the writers wanted to do. There's a ton of ideas thrown together and none of them feel fleshed out at all. all. The first idea is that hell is broken open and Sam and Dean are fighting past things they've killed. It's cool and I really dig that. I thought that'd be a cool arc to go back to, especially with seasons 4 and 5 and the method of tying in Monster of the Weeks to the myth arc. Too bad that's not what they do, and the next idea is Sam and Dean fighting famous ghosts like Jack the Ripper, Lizzie Borden, and so on. It's a nice idea, I guess, but this should have been a one-off episode part of the arc, and these guys are essentially just the main villains. Episode 2 is one of the most bottom of the barrel baffling episodes of the entire show for me. None of these ghosts are compelling to watch wander around this overly exposed and poorly lit town. Rowena and Ketch have some baffling sexual tension, and the show retcons one of the better moments of Kevin's character. Remember the cool moment in season 11 when Chuck sent Kevin to heaven after he was trapped in the Veil? Turns out Chuck actually sent Kevin to hell. Why? Just cause he's a dick, I guess. Not only is this yet another showing of the show completely fucking over Kevin, but it ends up creating a pretty big headache of a retcon. New character Belphegor says that a soul that's been to hell cannot go to heaven. Sam and Dean immediately bring up the fact that Bobby was in hell and sent to heaven for the trials, and their dad escaped hell and went to heaven, only for Belphegor to state that God just changed the rules. That's the level of writing that we're with now. God's just changing shit. I guess it inherently in-universe makes sense, but it's just lazy storytelling. It's even more apparent when you realize that Dean went to hell at the end of season 3, and yet when he and Sam were killed in season 5, they both went to heaven. And I'd probably be able to get behind this retcon more if they did it for a good reason, but no, it's really just to fuck over Kevin again. This poor character never deserved anything that happened to him, and they just completely rip him from the okay-ish ending that he got, going to heaven, and then having him wander the earth destined to turn into a vengeful spirit. It's just awful. I really hate that. I guess thankfully their arc wraps up in a decent way, especially with Rowena's sacrifice, but after episode 2, the season really had a lot to do to prove itself, and I guess it sort of does. The next 2 episodes are interesting, and I especially like episode 5, Proverbs 17:3. That's another Steve Yockey episode, and I could honestly write an entire video about him because he just continues to make really great episodes. This episode, much like the season 14 finale, is so meta that it hurts, and I think that's really cool. Having Truck create essentially an entire Monster of the Week episode for Sam and Dean to work through is really awesome. Things move in a decent direction after a while, but they never end up sticking for too long. Move on to the idea of trapping Chuck the same way he did to Amara, and it's a really cool idea, and we get to a cool return of Purgatory, and Michael, the real Michael, shows up and helps. I like how Sam and Dean are able to convince him to help by him finding out there are more Michaels. It's a really solid way to go about it. Unfortunately, it's then dropped after 2 episodes. I like the idea of what happens, and when it's dropped in the episode, it's kind of cool, but actually felt like the writers had no idea what they wanted to do, so they just moved on to something else. We then move on to the dumbest storyline the show has ever tackled, with God removing their quote-unquote plot armor, only to undo it in the next episode. I need to spend a little bit more time on this actually, because not only is the concept of removing Sam and Dean's plot armor terrible, but it threatens to undo the entire show in one fell swoop. By proposing that Sam and Dean are only good hunters because Chuck said they could be, it's terrible and I just hate it. Supernatural has always been a show that's wrestled with the concept of free will, but this was one step too far, and it wasn't even as funny as they thought it was, which just makes the episode even worse because it's just way too goofy. Thankfully, after that, we move on to a great storyline with Chuck deciding to end every other universe. It's awesome. Too bad it's all done off screen and we're treated to various filler episodes that just feel like they never needed to exist at all. Like, what the hell is episode 16? Why are we watching Sam and Dean fight a Baba Yaga this close to the end of the show? And then they have the gall to have a scene where Billy shows up asking what they're doing on a hunt. I would really love to know too. You know, acknowledging the problem does not get rid of it. It's not until episodes 17 and 18 that the season finally feels like it has even an iota of the tension and stakes of season 5, and that's really disappointing. Granted, Unity and Despair, those 2 episodes, are fantastic. They're some of my favorites of the show. Unity really ramps up everything and feels like an episode that should have come way earlier, but it's fine, I guess. It's still terrific, and I love how it bounces between perspectives of everyone, and the climax is one of the best moments of the show. I especially love it because Chuck has always said that he's gonna have Sam and Dean kill each other, and you as the audience, you're like, that's not gonna happen. Sam and Dean are like, that's not gonna happen. But when the moment comes and Dean pulls the gun on Sam, it's such a crazy moment because you're like, oh, this makes sense. Everything's like clicking into place. I just love the climax of Unity. Despair is another great episode. I love the build-up and dread throughout it all. The scene where Eileen disappears is so damn good. I don't know how they made a texting scene so tense and compelling, but I love it. And then the twist that Chuck was getting rid of everyone was so cool. And then there's the Castiel and Dean scene. It might be burying your gaze, but this scene is still such a fantastic finale for Castiel as a character, and I just love seeing Billy tear through the bunker. Just, this is the kind of shit that I wanted in a final season. You know, things that felt grand, explosive, epic, and we just don't get it except for these 2 episodes, and it baffles me. And then, unfortunately, Inherit the Earth, episode 19 still exists. I've come around a bit on this episode. I still like all of the events that occur in it, but it is just a complete mess. It's like 5 episodes of TV in one, and things just happen and nothing has any time to breathe at all. The actual resolution of the season is solid, but this was a season that needed way better of a finale than this to tie everything together and redeem itself, and then it didn't do that at all. Like, things just happen and then stop happening. Lucifer shows up and then makes a new death by killing a Reaper, and then kills that death, which apparently archangels can kill something that's older than God now. I just... Oh, and then there's the thing with Michael where they just completely drop that he resents God and he's just being a good boy again, and then there's the big fight with just, it's such a mess. But I do like Jack becoming the new god, and I like the final scene where they tell Chuck to just go fuck himself, so I guess it kind of works out. And then there's the series finale. I definitely don't like it as much as I used to. I think that ending a show that was mostly about how family isn't just blood and how family can expand with just Sam and Dean being in heaven is a little unfortunate, but I still like it. I think it's really silly. Sometimes, though, you got the bad wigs, and then there's the whole emo pop cover of Carry On Wayward Son right after they use the actual song. But I think when the episode needs to hit an emotional moment, it does hit it very well. And I wish we got something more bold. I still think Swan Song is the peak of the show when it comes to a finale, but I definitely don't hate Carry On, and it's not bad enough to undo the rest of the show. It does its job, and it wraps everything up in a way that I still feel content, even if I'm not as satisfied as I would have been had the show ended with season 5. At the end of the day, man, again, the show is just, it's such a mess. There are a lot of cool ideas, but I never feel like any of them are executed well enough. We get Chuck as a villain, which is cool in concept, and in execution, he's great most of the time, but his screen presence is lacking, and the plot lines surrounding him are just so dull and confusing. There are so many filler episodes. Seasons 13 and 14 fixed this issue for me by balancing plot and filler way better, but now season 15 just returned to season 9 and 10 levels of pacing, where we get a really cool plot episode only for them to just deliver the most mediocre episode you've seen in years. There's an entire episode dedicated to just having Dean on stage to sing the Dukes of Hazzard theme. Like, what's the point? And then the first 3 episodes are a waste. There's an episode later where they wrap up the Kaya plotline and the Wayward Sisters setup, and it's just so much of the season feels like it's dedicated to everything but fighting God. And then we also don't get anything cool with Amara. The Empty is barely in the season, even though they get some cool moments. The season as a whole is just even worse when compared to season 5, and I know I shouldn't because nothing's going to compare to season 5, but I have to, right? I mean, that was the original endpoint, the first final season, and it's infinitely better than this. A good showing of this is the scene between Dean and Death in 2 Minutes to Midnight. It's a terrific scene. I can't show it here because of copyright, but go look it up. It's one of the best of the entire show. And then in episode 15 of season 15, we have a scene similar to that with Dean and Amara. It's the same basic premise, a conversation over food as Dean begs for the help to stop the end of existence with a being that views him as an ant, but it's not the same. The tension isn't there. The scene is fine, I guess, but it's nowhere near as impactful. They attempt to recreate the scene, but the original is still better. Just like the season can try as hard as it wants, but it will never be as good as season 5. And that really is just a giant tragedy. I just wish it was more, right? I wish the plot lines were more focused. I wish the episodes were better. I wish there were more character returns and even fan service. Like, for a run of the show that people consider to be fan fiction, I didn't feel like I got any fan service out of this. I wish I liked it more. I think I enjoyed enough. There are moments that blow me away, but there are just as many that leave me scratching my head and honestly just completely angry at the show, like that it would end like this. Supernatural ends off a 15-season run with a resounding meh, and I guess it could be much worse, but I love this show and I wanted it to be better, and I truly don't know if I'll ever rewatch it in its entirety again. I could probably watch seasons 1 through 5 easily, and 11 through 14 is strong enough, but the show is so long and so tired that at a point, I don't know if it's worth watching all 15 seasons in a row. I'm not going to rate this season. I really don't know how to rate it out of 10. It has so many moments I love, but I cannot get over the parts I don't like, try as I might. The best episodes of the season are Unity, episode 17, Despair, episode 18, and Proverbs 17:13, episode 5. And the worst episodes of the season are episode 2, The Rupture, episode 16, Drag Me Away From You, and episode 10, The Hero's Journey. So, I sort of realized when I was writing this, I never really talked about the reason I called this a renaissance. Sure, quality-wise it makes sense. I think pretty much every season here is a large step above seasons 9 and 10 and even 6 and 7, but renaissance? Well, it's really just about the new ideas that this era had. So much of what dragged down seasons 8 through 11 was the reuse of not only Heaven and Hell, but the Monster of the Week episodes that were so bland. It was always just another ghost or vampire. Seriously, I checked and there's over 15 episodes from that era that's either about a ghost, a vampire, or a werewolf, and a lot of them take place within seasons 9 and 10. And if it's not one of those three, it's a witch or a pagan god. But filler episodes in this era are almost completely different. In season 12 alone, there's a total of only 3 episodes that have a plot about a ghost, a vampire, or a werewolf. And when you know it, these are some of the dullest episodes of the season. Instead, we get an episode with a psychic child that feels like it came straight out of season 2, an episode where Dean kills Hitler, and an entire episode where him, Sam, and Mary are trapped in a home with a demon that's killing hunters one after another. A lot of these filler episodes just feel really fresh. And then seasons 13 and 14 dial it up to another level. Even if the concepts and monsters are old, what's done with them feels incredibly satisfying and new. I talked about Breakdown, but that's one of the most creative episodes of the entire show. The Big Empty takes what should have been a boring shapeshifter episode and transforms it into a compelling episode about grief. Various and Sundry Villains is a actually fun witch episode, which we don't very much get, and it's focused on Rowena and Sam's collective trauma. There's The Scorpion and the Frog, which is an episode where Sam and Dean go on a heist with 2 demons named Smash and Grab. Season 14 gives us Mint Condition, which is a fun slasher parody that I really like. We also get Optimism, which slams 2 really cool storylines together, one with a necromancer who has a zombie boyfriend, and the other one being about Sam and Charlie hunting down this crazy fly thing. The second one feels straight out of Doctor Who, and I mean that as a compliment. I should cover Doctor Who. Prophet and Loss has a really cool idea about a new prophet that's sort of glitched out, and Peace of Mind puts Sam and Castiel smack in the middle of a 1950s town. It's just so fun to see these new concepts. For so much of seasons 8 through 11, it felt like filler episodes were just going to be where you turn your brain off, but so many of the quote-unquote filler episodes in 12 through 15 are arguably better than the main plot. I mean, when I listed my favorite episodes from season 13, there was not a single main plot episode in that entire list. And of course, there's occasionally your dull outing, especially in season 15, sadly. There are numerous episodes where I just wanted to go to sleep, but I feel like for the bulk of it, the show had so many great ideas for one-offs, and not only one-offs, but main arcs. A lot of fascinating new concepts like the multiverse, the Empty, Death's Library, and a whole lot of new lore that I already brought up. And when the characters might be running on empty in terms of where you take them, the writers manage to work just as well with defining who they already are. Sam and Dean really get no real character growth, but they're both fully grown now, and seeing them double down and continue to define themselves in their post-season 11 status quo was a great thing to do. And I absolutely understand if you dislike this era. I know a lot of people do. They don't like decisions made with villains, they don't like the tone, they don't like character moments. It's all entirely valid. But all I wanted to do today was show you why I personally really love this era, and why I think it makes the show better as a whole. Had the final few seasons been as dull and drab as seasons 6 through 10, I don't think I would have spent over an hour talking about them. At the end of the day, Supernatural is absolutely my favorite show. You go on and on about how I don't have taste or how I should watch better TV shows, and you'd probably be right, but I really do love this show. Of course, part of that has to do with when I got into it. I was going through a hard time in my life, and at some point I just sat down and binged the show. Flash forward from 2017 to 2022, and I've talked about 15 seasons and numerous other topics about the show, and it's been an honor to write all of these scripts and deliver videos to you guys that you really seem to love. It's made content creation an absolute dream come true, and I never thought I'd see a fraction of this success ever. I've literally made money from videos now, which I thought was just a pipe dream. So thank you all so much, and I'm asking you a question. What do you want to see next? I have a ton of content ideas for this show and others in the pipeline, of course, and I want to cover the Winchesters, but what else do you want? I'll have a poll up in a couple days, but leave in the comments any weird or not weird topics about this show that you want to see covered, and I'll do my best to cover them. Literally, if there's an episode you want me to talk about, or a season you want me to talk about more in depth, a character or relationship, something like Destiel, I will try my best to make a video about it. I really want to give back to you and deliver my thoughts on Supernatural, since I know so many of you guys really like what I have to say. Thank you all so much for watching, and please consider subscribing or even joining the channel. Your support means the world to me, and I'll see you all next time. Again, thank you so much for sticking with this entire series. I'm so sorry it took so long to come out, but now that it's out, I hope that you can love it and rewatch it from time to time.
Guys, I'm still stuck on the Your Everyday Nerd set.